What's up everyone, this is Tranquil Toys, back with another review. This time I'm taking a look at the Bossfight Studios Legends of Lucha Ultimo Dragon figure. I did pick this up from the Big Bad Toy Store. The figure is $22.99 on there, so if you want to pick it up, that's the price you gotta pay. So I'm gonna see how this stacks up against some of the other wrestling figures out there on the market. I'm also gonna see if this is worth the price of $22.99. I'll take a look at the articulation, the details, and the paint, everything like that, and of course give my honest opinion all throughout the review. So I'm going to get right into it. First thing really quick, just the packaging is pretty cool, I guess. Got a picture of Ultimo Dragon there on the front, and on the back got a picture of the render of the figure, and then some of the other figures in the wave. Not really interested in those, but I was excited to get this one because it's Ultimo Dragon, so I had to pick this up for my WCW collection. Anyway, the next thing I want to mention is all these belts that you see on the figure. Those are from other figures, other companies and stuff like that. But I'm just trying to recreate that famous picture of Ultimo Dragon when he had all those belts. So there's no belts that came with the figure. And the figure actually didn't come with anything. It just came with everything you see here. No alternate hands, no alternate heads, no, of course, weapons or anything. Let's see if this figure is worth it. We'll take a closer look. So the first thing, the head sculpt is pretty good. It's not like super realistic. It kind of reminds me of Jax, the old Jax wrestling figures a little bit. But I think it's pretty good, and it even looks decent next to some of the other wrestling figures out there. The paint is really good. The gold is shiny. You got the kanji, or the Japanese characters, on the side of the mask. The little tassels at the end of the mask also look pretty good, and they feel pretty durable, pretty strong. And yeah, the paint is really nice. A lot of sculpt on the mask, and it feels pretty sturdy. It's not too rubbery or anything. It feels pretty sturdy. Probably could break if you mess with it too much though. And then you get to the chest plate here. Again, good paint work, good detail throughout, and it is textured all throughout the piece here, so that's pretty good. And again, on the back, you know, they didn't skip out on any of the details. And also on the torso here, there's some sculpted detail on the skin, I guess to replicate pores or something. He's got a good musculature sculpt, pretty realistic. Most of the wrestling figures are not as accurate as this. That's a bonus point for Bossfight. You got the wrist gauntlets, same amount of detail and sculpt as the rest of the figure, so that's good. And these are also a separate piece. You also got the laces right there on the back of the gauntlet. Red belt, which is a separate piece, and then you got the spikes on the side of the tights, which is a sturdier plastic, so you don't have to worry about that breaking. Although again, it would break if you mess with it too much. And then you got the wrinkles on the pants, then the boots, which are a separate piece also. And the kick pads on the front are sculpted. Not any paint on here, but I think that's accurate to some of his looks. And then he does have holes on the bottom, and then writing on the bottom of his right boot. Oh, and then he also has one elbow pad. He did wear one elbow pad here and there, but not always. So it's kind of interesting that they decided to do that. I'm pretty impressed with how good this turned out. The paint is not sloppy. There's no QC issues with the paint or the sculpt. But now let's check out the articulation. The head is easily removable, and we have a dumbbell joint for the neck. Now the problem is that the dumbbell joint goes really far down there, so that does hinder articulation. It should have been a bigger ball at the bottom and then moved up closer to the top of the neck, but they didn't do that. It still has pretty good range, but it would have been better if they would have made that change. He looks that far down, that far up. The mask does not really hinder. If anything's hindering it, it's, you know, what I mentioned before with the neck. And he does have some tilt. Good enough. I think that's pretty good to get some more emotion out of him. And like I always say, that's important for characters with masks and things like that. And of course you get the 360 rotation, you get the swivel on that. And it does kind of pivot forward and back because it is a dumbbell joint. And then we get to the shoulders. There's no butterfly joints or anything like that. It's just a simple hinge and swivel. So it swivels out that far. You can go a little bit higher. It does run into the chest piece. And then when you swivel it, it also runs into the chest piece. So you just got to be aware of that. No bicep swivel, but single jointed elbows, which this one's kind of hindered by the elbow pad. And then we come down to the wrist. It's a swivel. And then this is interesting decision that they've made here. Wrist hinge is up and down, so it's like a sword or a gun holding hand, but he doesn't come with any accessories like that, so it's interesting that they went with that. It's also a grip hand, But again, no weapons. I would have liked just fists, or maybe one fist, one open hand. That would have been, that would have made more sense than two grip hands with nothing to hold. And also, what's interesting is that the hands are easily removable, and you can take off the gauntlet, and you can take off the elbow pad. Taking off the chest piece is a little bit harder. You'd have to pop the arms out of their sockets, which does seem like it's doable. You have to heat up the torso though in order to do that. Anyways, now we get to the most interesting part of the figure, which is the torso. So as you can see, there's no cut right there. So you would assume that it's just a swivel. There is a dumbbell joint between the lower abdomen and the waist here. So it does swivel, and then it also goes that far forward. It does look better than the normal hinge with the big cuts down the abs. So it does look better, especially from the front and from the side, not so much the back. You can see some of the gapping from the back, and the same thing moving forward. Also, there's a ugly seam right there at the base of the abdomen, so that is kind of unfortunate that they constructed it that way. I think they could have done a little bit better on that. And it also goes side to side pretty far. It does look really weird. It's like he dislocates his entire torso. It doesn't look that great. That kind of makes it unusable, but one thing you can kind of do is use the belt to hide that a little bit. So you can position the belt to sort of hide that seam that it creates. So it's not too bad in the end, but I think it still could have been constructed a little bit better. It does get good range though, and of course you get the full 360. And this is a soft rubber piece on the underwear here, so it doesn't hinder the waist articulation. Also doesn't hinder the leg articulation. You can force it a little bit higher, which is pretty good, for this kind of character. He's going to need a lot of leg movement. And also the fins on the side of his pants doesn't hinder articulation either. It pushes the rubber underwear piece out of its way. So there's no thigh cut, but there is kind of a thigh swivel at the ball joint. So you can swivel that forward and backward. A minimal amount, not a whole lot, not as much as you would get from a regular thigh cut. And then single knees, I mean, it's okay for what it is, but double jointed knees would have been preferred. But this is kind of like their lower price line. They have a higher price line. They pack in more articulation and things like that. This is their lower priced line, but it's still pretty good. And then you get a boot swivel, so that swivels all the way around, and there's no problems with that. And then the ankle, of course, hinges. So overall, I'm pretty impressed with this figure. For $22.99, everything is really good. It's constructed really good, and it's not like Lightning Collection style articulation. It's not like Fig Arts or Figma in terms of engineering, but compared to some of the other wrestling figures out there, especially the Basics line from Mattel, this is definitely much better than that, and in some cases it is much better than some Elites. So I think this is a pretty strong release from Bossfight. I'm interested to see what other cruiserweight wrestlers they'll be making later. Hopefully we can see a Psicosis and Parka. That would be really cool. I'd have to get that for sure. But anyways, let's get into some comparisons with some of the other wrestling figures out there. So of course you got to compare it to Rey Mysterio, also from WCW, even though this is one of his outfits from ECW, but it is something that he would have worn in WCW as well. So I think these look pretty good together, although Rey Mysterio is very undersized, or I think it's more of the case that Ultimo Dragon is oversized. There wasn't really that big of a height difference between them in real life. Some angles it looks worse than others, like that looks really bad. But if you were to have them, grappling, it wouldn't be that big of a difference. But it is something you need to be aware of if you're expecting these figures to match up 100%. Now here it is next to a AEW Supreme Collection Kenny Omega. And of course he is taller, which is of course accurate. And in terms of the torso articulation, and I'll just go ahead and compare the torso articulation between them. The AEW figures have two dumbbell joints, which gets you that far in comparison to the Bossfight figure. So you get more, but like I said, this is their lower priced line, and this is their higher priced line, but still pretty good for a lower priced line like that to have that kind of articulation. Then here it is next to the Ultimate Edition AJ Styles, and they're the same height, pretty much the same height. They look pretty good next to each other too. Now comparing the torso articulation to the Ultimate Edition, the Ultimate Editions are really bad in comparison. Like, that's all you're gonna get is that much, and that's pretty much nothing. Like, it goes that far back, but it goes that far forward, and that's all the upper torso here. It doesn't have the ball joint on the lower waist. This goes much further, and again, lower priced, higher priced. This was $22.99. These are about $34.99. So I think you're getting a better value. Also, something that I didn't mention before, but it's a different kind of plastic that Bossfight is using. They're using, it almost feels like a harder rubbery plastic. It doesn't feel like this kind of brittle and hollow plastic that Mattel uses most of the time, especially for their torsos. They use that kind of, that brittle, thin, hollow plastic that's hard. It's like a hard shell kind of plastic. But this feels like a dense, softer plastic. So this feels more durable. You know, you can hit it against the floor and you don't have to worry about it denting or breaking. It feels a little bit more durable and higher quality. And again, $22.99. I think that's a pretty good deal. It actually does feel a little bit more like the AEW figures. So if you're curious to know how it feels without buying the figure, it feels more like an AEW figure than it does a Mattel figure, but it still feels different. So a really disappointing wrestling figure. The Power Town Stan the Lariat Hansen, who towers over Ultimo Dragon. Yeah, and again, comparing the torso articulation, that's how much you're getting there. And here's how much you're getting with the Bossfight figure. So, yeah, man, I don't know. These are really disappointing Power Town figures. And they made another stupid decision, in my opinion. They're making the Matt Cardona and that other guy, whatever his name was, they're making those two figures. Zack Ryder and Kurt Hawkins, that's the names that they used to go by. They're making those two guys, and not a lot of people seem interested in that. They're doing like a special 2-pack. It's $100. It's really disappointing seeing them make that decision, because I would have rather to see them make wrestlers that people actually want instead of those two guys. They do have a small fan base, but I mean, it's not big enough to justify making figures for them, especially how expensive those figures are. Now I'll do some figure comparisons with non-wrestling figures. Here it is next to McFarlane Flash. Here he is next to G.I. Joe Classified Shipwreck. Then Marvel Legends Captain America. They're almost the same height. Captain America is a tiny bit taller. I think they're pretty much the same height though. Real quick, I'll do a head swap. Pretty loose. You'll have to do some modifications to make that fit better, but that doesn't look too bad. So in case you want to make a custom, or if you want to make like a Ultimo Dragon Marvel Legends thing, and then here's Captain America's head on the Ultimo Dragon body, just in case you want to use these bodies for customs or something like that. And finally, here is Ultimo Dragon next to a Boliverse figure, and this is my Van Damme custom. Ultimo Dragon is a little bit taller. So my final thoughts on this figure is that it's pretty good. It's a really strong release from Bossfight, and for any wrestling fan or old school wrestling fan, WCW wrestling fan, you definitely need this in your collection. The figure feels good, and with the amount of articulation that you get, you can get it in some decent poses. I think this figure is really good. Not disappointed. I don't feel like I'm ripped off or anything. That's all I gotta say, guys. Let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know what you think of the review, what you think of this figure, and if you're gonna pick it up or not. Anyways, guys, I gotta go. I'll see you in the next one.